On Friday, the 27th of June, 2026, 3 days ago, something happened in the Rivers State House of Assembly that the mainstream Nigerian press reported as a governance story. It is not a governance story. It is a chess move, and once you understand the position on the board, the move makes complete sense. Martin Amaewhule, the speaker installed by Wike, sustained by the Supreme Court, who presided over 3 impeachment attempts against Fubara, who locked the gates of the assembly when Fubara arrived to present the 2025 budget, who barred Fubara for submitting any budget at all until the impeachment probe concluded. That same speaker approved Fubara's 2026-2028 fiscal framework within 24 hours of receiving it. He criticized Fubara for being 9 months late, and then he approved it anyway. Why? The answer tells you everything about the state of the Rivers political war right now, about who is winning and who is managing their losses, and about what the board looks like with 7 months to go before the January 2027 presidential election. Stay with me. 9ja Brief covers the move behind the move. Subscribe now, because this is where the real political analysis lives. Before we analyze the chess move, you need to understand the piece that was just moved. The Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, the MTEF, is a fiscal planning document. It is not the budget itself. It is the foundation on which the budget is built. 3 years of projected revenues, projected expenditures, economic assumptions, and development priorities. Under Rivers State's Fiscal Responsibility Law, Section 10, Subclause 1, Subclause B, the MTEF is supposed to be presented to the House of Assembly in September, 4 months before the start of the next financial year. Governor Fubara submitted it on June 25, 2026, 9 months late. Without the MTEF approved, the annual appropriation bill, the actual budget, cannot be formally presented. Without the appropriation bill, every naira the Rivers State government spends in 2026 is constitutionally exposed. No legislative authorization, no legal cover, no accountability framework. Here is how serious this has been. Rivers State has a GDP estimated at $28.4 billion, comparable to Rwanda and Botswana as standalone economies. Its proposed 2026 appropriation stands at 1.85 trillion naira. This is the budget of a major economic actor in West Africa. And for 5 months of 2026, the legislative process required to give that budget legal force was completely stalled. Not because the governor refused to submit the documents, but because the assembly, controlled by Amaewhule, had explicitly barred Fubara from presenting any budget at all until the impeachment probe concluded. A World Bank water project worth $250 million stalled. Infrastructure contracts without legislative backing, constitutionally questionable. The state's credit rating, damaged. Its position as a destination for domestic and foreign direct investment, visibly eroded. Rivers State's $28.4 billion economy was held hostage by a document that nobody passed. And then, in 24 hours, Amaewhule passed it. To understand the approval, you first need to understand the blockade. On January 8, 2026, the Rivers State House of Assembly held what would become its most consequential sitting of the year. Speaker Amaewhule presided as Majority Leader Major Jack read a formal notice of gross misconduct against both Governor Fubara and his deputy Ngozi Odu. 26 lawmakers signed. The allegations cited demolition of the Assembly complex, extra budgetary spending, withholding funds from the Assembly Service Commission, and failure to comply with the Supreme Court's judgment on legislative financial autonomy. And then, in the same session, the Assembly did something extraordinary. It barred Governor Fubara from presenting the MTEF and the 2026 appropriation bill until the impeachment investigation was concluded. Let that settle. An elected legislature whose primary constitutional function is to appropriate public funds for governance voted to prevent the governor from submitting those funds for appropriation, not as a punishment for crime, but as a condition of a political standoff. What was the strategic logic? Analysts and observers who tracked the crisis identified 4 distinct reasons why the budget blockade served the Wike camp's interests in the first half of 2026. First, a governor who cannot pass a budget cannot govern visibly. Contracts stall, civil service promotions freeze, infrastructure projects lose momentum. The political cost of governance paralysis falls on the executive, not the legislature. Second, spending without appropriation is illegal. Every naira Fubara spent in 2026 without a passed budget was constitutionally exposed, another potential charge for a future impeachment process. The blockade was also a trap. It created conditions under which Fubara was guaranteed to spend money illegally. Third, the constitutional deadline. The emergency-era budget passed by the National Assembly under sole administrator Ibas was estimated to remain in legal force until approximately August 2026. After that, without a new appropriation, Rivers State would face a constitutional spending crisis, and the Assembly's fingerprints would not be on it. The governor's would. Fourth, leverage for 2027. The Assembly's silence and inactivity was, as one analyst described it publicly, a deliberate political tactic, testing whether Fubara would honor unspoken compliance arrangements around who controls what in the state as 2027 approached. For 5 months, the board sat in this position. Then something changed. The Assembly approved the MTAF on June 27, 2026. The question is, what changed between January and June to make approval suddenly expedient? The answer has 4 parts, and each one illuminates a different dimension of Rivers' political chess. Part 1. The constitutional clock. The emergency-era budget was running out. Constitutional lawyers had publicly confirmed that Rivers State was approaching a legal spending crisis. If the budget impasse continued past August, both sides faced consequences, but the Assembly faced a specific one, being publicly blamed for an unconstitutional governance vacuum in a pre-election year. A speaker who wants to be remembered as a governance actor in 2027 cannot go into campaign season having blocked a state's entire budget for 9 months. Part 2. The 2027 calculus shifted. With Fubara formally withdrawn from the APC governor's primary, the primary political purpose of the budget blockade, creating conditions for impeachment, which itself was a tool to force Fubara's exit from the 2027 race, had been achieved. The prize was already won. Continuing the blockade after winning carries cost with no corresponding benefit. Part 3. Kingsley Chinda needs a functional state. The man Wike publicly endorsed as the preferred next governor, Kingsley Chinda, will inherit Rivers State in 2027 if Rivers State is governable. A state whose $28.8 billion economy has been in fiscal paralysis for a year is not an inheritance worth having. The groundwork for a governable Rivers in 2028 begins with a passed budget in 2026. Part 4. The approval came with a rebuke, and that rebuke matters. Amaewhule did not approve the MTAF quietly. He criticized Fubara in public, on the record, for the 9-month delay. He cited the fiscal responsibility law by section and subsection. He reminded Rivers people and political observers that the Assembly had maintained constitutional standards throughout. That rebuke was not rhetorical, it was a positioning document for 2027. The Speaker was not approving Fubara's plan, he was approving the state's fiscal framework, on his terms, in his time, with his critique on record, and giving Wike's preferred narrative of legislative accountability its most recent credible expression. Now, here is the question. Drop it in the comments. Is this approval a genuine sign of political settlement, or is it Wike's consolidating their 2027 position? I want your analysis, not just your opinion. Let's see who reads the board correctly.
Now, let us be precise in the way Nigerian political coverage rarely is about who gained what from this move. What Fubara gained. He gained the ability to present the 2026 appropriation bill. Sources reported he was ready to transmit the full budget to the Assembly as early as the following Tuesday, June 30th. If that budget passes, Rivers State will, for the first time since 2023, have a complete, constitutionally grounded financial year to operate from. That matters for civil servants. It matters for contractors. It matters for the ordinary Rivers woman who depends on the state for the road in front of her house, the health center in her LGA, the school her child attends. He also gained something more subtle, a functional legislative relationship going into his final year in office. A governor who exits in 2027 with passed budgets, screened commissioners, and functioning infrastructure has a legacy. A governor who exits after 3 years of paralysis has a cautionary tale. What Wike keeps? He keeps control of the 2027 governorship process. Fubara's withdrawal from the primary is not reversed by the MTEF. The APC Rivers candidate selection process is still in his hands. The assembly that just approved the MTEF is still his assembly, led by his speaker, guided by his majority leader, aligned with his preferred successor. He also keeps the narrative frame. By having Amaewhule publicly criticize the 9-month delay before approving the document, Wike's camp closes the political year with the governor on record as having failed a basic constitutional obligation, and the assembly on record as having shown restraint and institutional responsibility despite provocation. That is the story they will tell in 2027 campaign materials. In chess terms, Fubara has been permitted to castle, to move his king to safety, to restore a defensive position. But the pawns that controlled the center of the board, the 2027 governorship, the assembly majority, the APC party structure, the LGA machinery, those pieces did not move. Wike still holds the center. Let us look at the board as it stands today, June 29, 2026, with 7 months to the presidential election and 8 months to the Rivers State governorship primary season. The MTEF is approved. The appropriation bill is imminent. For the first time since 2023, the Rivers executive and legislature are processing a budget together, with criticism, with tension, but without a constitutional rupture. This is the most functional governance moment Rivers State has had in 3 years. And it is also, paradoxically, the most politically clarifying moment in the entire Fubara-Wike story. Because what the MTEF approval reveals is that the political war is over, on Wike's terms, and that both sides have tacitly accepted the outcome. Fubara governs his remaining term, Wike's camp manages the 2027 succession. The assembly functions as a watchdog that also serves as a political instrument, criticizing the governor publicly while approving what is necessary to prevent a governance crisis that would embarrass everyone.
What does this mean for ordinary Rivers people? For the nurse in Degema, the civil servant in Obio-Akpo, the small business owner in Rumola? It means their state now has a budget framework. It means the paralysis that cost the state multiple foreign investment projects, that suppressed public sector promotions, that left contractors uncleared, that paralysis now has an end date. But it also means that the decisions about who governs them in 2027, which party carries Rivers State in the presidential election, and which coalition controls the assembly that will pass next year's budget, none of those decisions will be made in a polling booth. They are being made on a chessboard. And the person who has been playing white throughout this game just approved a pawn advance on the opponent's terms because the game was already won. Martin Amaewhule approved Fubara's fiscal framework because the political war no longer required him to block it. The block served its purpose. It created conditions for impeachment, which created conditions for a forced political concession, which produced Fubara's withdrawal from the 2027 race. The prize was collected. Now the board enters its final phase. Fubara governs. The 2026 budget passes. The 2027 primary proceeds under Wike-aligned party structures. And the political class of Rivers State, the same class that produced 3 impeachment processes, a state of emergency, a Supreme Court funding freeze, and 5 presidential villa peace deals, moves seamlessly from the language of constitutional crisis to the language of good governance. There is one actor in this story who had no seat at any of those peace deal meetings, who sent no lawyers to any of the 40 court cases, who was never consulted about any of the impeachment conditions, who will simply show up in January 2027 with a voter card and mark a ballot and wonder quietly whether it means what they were told it means. The ordinary Rivers person. The chess game is almost over. The question is, did they win anything? Share this video with one person who watched the Amaewhule approval story and thought it was good news without knowing what it actually means.